be thou my
On May the 12th, 2022, a mother stood over a small white casket and said goodbye to her 5-year-old son. His name was Kyler. He was a genius, he was joy, he was everything she had. She held herself together that day, through the tears, through the flowers, through the people hugging her and telling her it was going to be okay. She stood there and she buried her baby. And she walked away from that cemetery still breathing. 5 days later, she was dead too. 5 days, not 5 years, not 5 months. 5 days after laying her son in the ground, 32-year-old Kaylynn Davidson was shot and killed outside a restaurant in downtown South Bend, Indiana. And the question that stopped an entire city cold was simply this: how does a grieving mother, a woman who had just experienced the single most devastating loss a human being can survive, end up dead before the flowers on her son's grave even had time to wilt? The answer to that question involves a beef that started over nothing. A social media post that crossed an unforgivable line. A memorial that somebody destroyed in the dark of night. And a decision made 5 days after a funeral that nobody could take back. Before we go any further, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you find value in these discussions. Because this story is not just about crime. It is about what happens when grief meets rage. When a mother's pain is mocked by someone who should have known better. When the people around a broken woman keep pouring fuel on a fire instead of water. Kaylynn Davidson deserved to grow old. She deserved to watch her surviving son become the man she was raising him to be. She deserved more than 5 days. Stick around, because we are going to tell her story the right way, from the very beginning. So let's start with the person. Because in cases like this, it is very easy for the violence and the tragedy to swallow the human being at the center of it all. And I refuse to let that happen here. Kaylynn Davidson was 32 years old. She was born and raised in South Bend, Indiana, a working-class city about 95 miles southeast of Chicago. A city that has seen its share of hardship. A city where people work hard, raise families, and build lives the best way they know how. And Kaylynn was doing exactly that. She was the kind of woman who filled a room the moment she walked in. Loud in the best possible way. Direct. Unapologetic. The kind of person who told you exactly what she thought whether you asked for it or not. Some people found that hard to deal with. Her sons found it reassuring. Because when your mother is that kind of woman, you always know where you stand. You always know she is in your corner. You always know she is not going anywhere. She had 2 boys. Her eldest son, Kylen, was the big brother, the protector. The one who kept watch over his younger sibling the way only a firstborn child can. And then there was Kyler Nowlin Jackson, 5 years old. And extraordinary in every sense of that word. His father, Derek Jackson, spoke to reporters after Kyler's death, and the words he used are the kind that stay with you long after you hear them. He said his son was a mathematical genius. He said Kyler had been accepted into Kennedy Academy, a school in South Bend designed specifically for gifted children, and that all his little boy wanted to do was go there and prove just how smart he was. He said everybody who met Kyler loved him. He said he was everybody's baby. Now I want you to sit with that for a moment. A 5-year-old boy, already reading far above his grade level, already accepted into a gifted program, already carrying himself with the kind of quiet confidence that made adults stop and pay attention when he walked into a room. That was who Kyler Jackson was. And Kaylynn, even though she and Derek were no longer together as a couple, was raising that child with everything she had. She was running her own small business, taking orders, shipping packages, building something from scratch, documenting her boys' lives on social media because she was proud of them and she wanted the world to know exactly why. She was not perfect. She would have been the very first person to say that out loud. But she was present, she was grinding, and those two boys were her entire world. Now let's talk about Kimmery Wright. Because you cannot tell this story honestly without understanding how these two women ended up locked in a conflict that neither one of them could seem to walk away from. Kimmery Wright was 26 years old when this beef began, a South Bend woman, active on social media. Someone who, by multiple accounts, seemed to thrive on drama and conflict and making sure her name stayed in people's mouths. And the thing that started the war between her and Kaylynn Davidson? Almost too small to believe. Kimmery had laughed at a video showing one of Kaylynn's family members being jumped. That was the beginning. One reaction, one moment of mockery directed at someone Kaylynn loved. And from that single thoughtless act, a months-long conflict ignited between two women who barely even knew each other. Now here is the thing about Kaylynn Davidson. She was not built for letting things go, especially not something like that. So she and her cousin went looking for Kimmery, found her at a local mall, and handled it the way street conflict often gets handled. Kimmery got jumped, and from that moment forward, the gloves were off. Social media became their arena. Subliminal posts, screenshots being forwarded to mutual contacts, back and forth comments designed to humiliate and provoke. Two women, both mothers, both with children at home, spending time and energy on a digital war that served absolutely no one. This kind of conflict plays out in cities across America every single day. Most of the time, it stays exactly where it starts, online, petty, exhausting, but ultimately harmless. But then something happened to Kaylynn Davidson that changed the temperature of everything. Something that had nothing to do with Kimmery Wright. Something far worse than any beef, far worse than any social media post, far worse than anything either of these women had ever experienced. April the 30th, 2022 was a Saturday evening. The kind of evening where nothing feels out of the ordinary, where a parent drops a child off at a family member's house and expects everything to be exactly as they left it when they come back. Derek Jackson dropped 5-year-old Kyler off at his grandmother's house on the west side of South Bend. Nothing unusual about that. Kyler had been there before. He knew the house. He knew the people. He was comfortable. But while he was there that evening, Kyler and a 9-year-old relative came across something inside that home that should never have been within reach of any child. A firearm. The South Bend Police Department later confirmed that the two children began handling the weapon. And in an instant, in the way that these things always happen too fast for anyone to stop, there was a single gunshot. And Kyler Jackson was hit. Officers responded to the 1000 block of Woodbine Way just after 10:30 that night and found the 5-year-old in critical condition. He was rushed to the hospital immediately. Derek Jackson told reporter afterward that neither he nor Kaylynn owned firearms. He said they had made a conscious and deliberate decision to keep guns out of their lives specifically because they had children. He said the weapon that was in that house was one that nobody they knew was aware of. And now his son was fighting for his life because of it. For 3 days, Kyler held on. 3 days of hospital waiting rooms. 3 days of prayers being sent up from every corner of the South Bend community. 3 days of a family holding its breath and begging God for a miracle. But on May the 4th, 2022, just after midnight, the miracle did not come. With no brain activity remaining and no path forward, Kyler Nowlin Jackson is removed from life support. He was 5 years old. And just like that, the brightest light in Kaylynn Davidson's world went out. Now, I need you to understand something about what this kind of loss does to a person. It does not just break you. It dismantles you completely. It takes everything you thought you knew about yourself, your strength, your identity, your reason for getting up in the morning, and it scatters it across the floor like broken glass. And Kaylynn was trying to survive that. In public, on social media, in real time, with the whole of South Bend watching. She poured her anguish out across Facebook in posts that were raw and unfiltered and devastating to read. She wrote about the family members who had gone silent. She wrote about the people who had gone back to their normal lives as if her son had never existed. She wrote that she was not okay, that she was about to lose her mind. She was not asking for sympathy. She was screaming for someone, anyone, to acknowledge the magnitude of what had just been taken from her. And that is exactly when Kimberly Wright, according to people close to Kaylynn, chose to make her move. Now, let me be precise here because the facts matter. What investigators and witnesses describe is this. While Kaylynn was in the deepest grief of her life, while she was planning the funeral for her 5-year-old son, posts began appearing on social media that people close to Kaylynn believed were directed at her. Posts that seemed to reference a woman who had been talking about someone being a bad mother. And now look at the situation that same woman was in with her child. Multiple people in Kaylynn's circle received screenshots of these posts. Multiple people believed they were about Kaylynn. And when Kaylynn found out, something shifted inside her that would not shift back. Because there is a line that most human beings, no matter how much conflict they have had with another person, understand should never be crossed. You do not touch a mother's dead child. You do not mock a woman's grief. You do not use the death of a 5-year-old boy as ammunition in a social media beef. And if the allegations are accurate, that line was crossed. Kaylynn got on Facebook Live. For 30 minutes, she spoke directly to her audience, to her community, about everything she was feeling, about the disrespect, about the mocking, about the people who thought her pain was something to joke about. And she made it clear. Once the funeral was over, this situation was going to be addressed. Now, from an analytical standpoint, that public statement is critical. Because what Kaylynn was doing, whether she realized it or not, was telling the world exactly where her head was. She was a woman operating on grief, rage, and zero sleep. A woman whose pain was being weaponized against her in real time. And she was announcing her intentions publicly for anyone watching to hear. Nobody stepped in. Nobody pumped the brakes. In the middle of all of this, Kaylynn found one thing that gave her a moment of peace. A friend had built a street memorial for Kyler. Balloons, candles, a teddy bear, a sign. People driving past and honking their horns to show love for a little boy and the mother who was trying to survive losing him. Kaylynn shared the video of it. And for just a moment, in the middle of the worst stretch of her entire life, something like comfort found her. And then someone destroyed it. Just days before Kyler's funeral, in what can only be described as an act of pure cruelty, somebody came for that memorial in the night. Balloons ripped apart, candles scattered. The tribute that had given Kaylynn her only moment of peace during those agonizing days, gone. Now, whether this was connected to the beef with Kimberly Wright or not, the impact on Kaylynn was devastating. She was already at the absolute edge of what a human being can endure. And someone had just pushed her closer to that edge. But here is what tells you something profound about who Kaylynn Davidson was as a person. She did not fall apart. Not that day. She held herself together. She got dressed. She showed up. And on May the 12th, 2022, she gave her son the send-off he deserved. On the morning of the funeral, she posted these words to Facebook. She wrote that everything that could have broken her before that day, the family drama, the rumors, her suit not arriving on time, someone tearing apart her baby's memorial, none of it had broken her. She wrote that her heart was full and filled with emotions she could not even name. She said she was ready to see her son. She said she loved everybody. She said goodbye to Kyler. She watched them close that casket. And then she walked back out into a world that still had Kimberly Wright in it. May the 17th, 2022. 5 days after burying her son, Kaylynn Davidson learned through social media that Kimmery Wright was going to be at the Linden Grill, a restaurant located in the 100 block of South Michigan Street in downtown South Bend. And Kaylynn made a decision. She got dressed, she drove downtown, and she walked through the front door of that restaurant. Now, I want to pause here and be very precise about what the evidence shows, because this matters enormously from a legal standpoint. Surveillance video reviewed by the Saint. Joseph County Prosecutor's Office confirmed that Kaylynn Davidson walked into the Linden Grill, located Kimmery Wright, and struck her first. That is a fact. A physical altercation broke out between the two women. Multiple people inside the restaurant moved to break up the fight. And that is when, according to charging documents, Kimmery Wright reached for a handgun. The moment that weapon appeared, Kaylynn and several other people inside the restaurant ran for the exit. They were running away. And here is the part that the Saint, Joseph County Prosecutor's Office, said made self-defense an impossible argument for the defense to make. Kimmery Wright did not stay inside. She followed Kaylynn to the exit, and she fired multiple shots at Kaylynn and at the other people who were fleeing the scene. Kaylynn Davidson was struck by gunfire outside the Linden Grill on South Michigan Street. She collapsed on the pavement. Bystanders called 911. Officers who were stationed nearby heard the shots and responded immediately. Kaylynn was transported to a local hospital with multiple gunshot wounds. She did not survive. 32-year-old Kaylynn Davidson, the woman who had just buried her 5-year-old son 5 days earlier, was pronounced dead at the hospital. And South Bend Police Chief Scott Rushkowski said something publicly in the aftermath that captured what the entire city was feeling. He said he did not know how many tears he had left. He said he did not know how many times he could keep processing news like this. He said he could not even begin to imagine what that family was going to have to carry from that point forward. 4 homicides in less than 1 week in one city. And at the center of the most heartbreaking of all of them, a mother and her son. Kimmery Wright did not get far. Officers located her inside the Linden Grill shortly after the shooting. She was still on the premises. The handgun was recovered from the scene. She was taken into custody. Within days, the St. Joseph County Prosecutor's Office filed charges. Kimmery Wright, 26 years old at the time, was charged with murder and voluntary manslaughter. She was held without bond at the St. Joseph County Jail. Now let me put my analytical cap on here for a moment, because the self-defense question was going to be the central battleground in this case from the very beginning, and the prosecution had a very clear answer to it. Indiana law, like most states, allows a person to use reasonable force to protect themselves from what they reasonably believe to be an imminent threat. But the key word there is imminent. Prosecutors argued, and the surveillance video supported, that by the time Kimmery Wright fired those shots, Kaylynn Davidson and the others were no longer a threat. They were running away. They were fleeing. And Wright had followed them to the exit and opened fire on people who had their backs to her. You cannot chase someone down and shoot them as they are running away and call it self-defense. That argument was not going to hold, and the prosecution knew it. Now here is where this story takes a turn that is difficult to process. While Kimmery Wright sat in jail awaiting trial, Kaylynn's family was planning a second funeral. On June 1st, 2022, Kaylynn Davidson was laid to rest beside her son Kyler, mother and child, together. And at some point after that, Kimmery Wright was released. And the way she handled that release on social media tells you a great deal about where her head was during this entire period. Around the Christmas holiday that year, she posted publicly about being home with her family. She wrote about being blessed, about freedom being the greatest gift she had received. She talked about having prayed that she would not spend the holidays behind bars, and that prayer being answered. Now, I am not going to tell you how to feel about that. But I will say this. Kaylynn Davidson's family was spending that same Christmas without her. Without her and without Kyler. 2 empty seats at whatever table they gathered around that December. And the woman charged with causing one of those empty seats was posting about blessings and freedom. As the trial date approached, Wright continued to post updates to her supporters. She talked about walking in with her head held high and walking out with a victory. She talked about being highly favored. She talked about being completely free very soon. But then, as the pressure of the trial mounted, her tone began to shift. The posts that had been full of faith and confidence started to carry something else underneath them. Frustration. She began posting about the judicial system being corrupt, about the case not being about justice, but about securing a conviction. And that shift, from confidence to grievance, tells you something. It tells you that as the trial got closer, the reality of what the evidence actually showed was starting to become very difficult to ignore. The trial of Kimmery Wright finally began in late October of 2023, more than a year after the shooting. More than a year after Kaylynn Davidson was buried beside her son. And when that jury sat down and reviewed what prosecutors put in front of them, the surveillance video, the witness testimony, the charging documents, the physical evidence, they came back with a verdict. Friday, November the 3rd, 2023. Guilty. Not of murder. The murder charge was dismissed. The firearm enhancement did not stick either. But guilty of voluntary manslaughter in the shooting death of 32-year-old Kaylynn Davidson. Now, from an analytical standpoint, voluntary manslaughter in Indiana is not a slap on the wrist, but it is significantly less than what prosecutors were originally seeking. And the question of whether justice was fully served here is one that reasonable people are going to answer differently depending on where they are standing. On December the 4th, 2023, Kimmery Wright was sentenced to 10 years in prison. 10 years. With credit for time already served and the possibility of good behavior reducing that further, she could potentially be out in under 7 years. For a public shooting in a restaurant that left a grieving mother down the pavement 5 days after she buried her child. Some people called that justice. Others called it something far less than that. So let me bring this all the way home, because I think there are things in this story that deserve to be said plainly. Kaylynn Davidson was not a perfect person. She had conflicts. She had enemies. She made decisions in the final days of her life that put her in the path of violence. But here is what I want you to hold on to after this story is over. Kaylynn Davidson was a mother in the most unimaginable pain a human being can experience. She had just watched her 5-year-old son, her gifted, brilliant, extraordinary 5-year-old son, be placed in the ground. And instead of being surrounded by people who helped her survive that grief, she was being mocked. She was being provoked. She was being pushed toward a confrontation that nobody around her seemed willing to prevent. And the only completely innocent person in this entire story, the only one who did absolutely nothing wrong, was Kyler Nowlin Jackson, 5 years old, gone before he ever got to prove how smart he was at Kennedy Academy. Gone before his mother got to watch him become the man he was already showing signs of being. Now mother and son rest together. The beef is over. The noise is finally gone. And somewhere in South Bend, Indiana, Kyler's father, Derek, is raising his surviving son, Kylan, and trying to find a way to explain to him why the world took his mother and his brother in the same month. I hope this story makes you think twice before you mock someone's pain. I hope it makes you think twice before you let a conflict escalate past the point of no return. And I hope it makes you think about the children. Because in every single one of these stories, it is always the children who carry the heaviest weight. May Kaylynn Davidson and her son Kyler rest in peace. They deserved so much more than this world gave them. If you found value in this story, please like, comment, and subscribe. These are real people, real families, and they deserve for their stories to be told with care and with truth.